The jungle was alive with sounds that didn't belong on any peaceful world. Thick vines twisted like snakes, and the trees seemed to lean closer the deeper someone walked inside. Valerie stood at the edge of the jungle, her purple skin shining. Softly under the twin suns, she was tall, with bright golden eyes and silver markings on her cheeks. Her breathing was calm, but her fingers trembled slightly as she touched the edge of a glowing leaf. "No one goes past the red trees," her brother had whispered. "They say the plants eat you." But he was sick now, and Valerie had no choice. The rare flower that could heal him only grew here. Deep in the forbidden jungle of Keras 9, she glanced at her scanner. A soft beep showed a strong energy signal just half a kilometer ahead. Without waiting, she stepped into the vines. Above her, something hissed, but she kept walking. Far behind her, on a nearby ridge, a pair of human eyes watched through a visor. Jake had seen her ship land 30 minutes ago. He didn't expect someone to head into the jungle alone, especially not a royal-blooded alien girl. He stayed quiet. Hidden in the trees, studying her movements, her gear was advanced. But even that wouldn't save her here. Jake knew what this jungle could do. His own team had lost 2 scientists last week, swallowed by something that looked like a flower, but felt like acid and bone. Still, the alien girl moved carefully, scanning each plant, using a long pole to test the ground. She wasn't stupid, just desperate. Jake could see it in the way she kept checking a small photo clipped inside her wrist. Screen it showed a young alien boy. Smiling weakly, Jake narrowed his eyes. Should he help her? Or stay back? The jungle didn't care either way. A few steps later, Valerie's scanner made a loud ping. The signal was close, very close. She turned and stepped onto what looked like a smooth patch of dark moss, and then it moved. In 1 second. The ground beneath her cracked open like a hungry mouth. Long green tendrils shot upward, wrapping around her waist and legs. She screamed as the jungle came alive, pulling her downward. The moss wasn't moss, was part of a giant carnivorous plant hidden for centuries, waiting for prey. Jake didn't think. He ran, he jumped over a log, slid down a slope, and sprinted through thick hanging vines as her screams echoed through the trees. By the time he reached the spot, only her arms were visible, reaching upward through the mouth of the plant as it slowly began to close. Jake pulled out his plasma, cut her and slashed at the thick vines. Acid hissed onto his gloves, and the smell of burnt plant matter filled the air. "Hold on," he shouted, though he wasn't sure if she could even hear him. One tendril tried to wrap around his neck, but he burned it away with a spark from his torch. Time was running out, the jaws were closing fast, and the plant was trying to pull her in deeper. With a grunt, Jake dropped the cutter and grabbed her by both arms. Come on," he muttered, pulling hard. Valerie's eyes opened just slightly, her golden gaze locking with his. Confused, panicked, and full of pain. Then, with one last pull, she came free, the 2 of them falling backward onto the jungle floor, covered in slime and coughing. Behind them, the plant roared in some deep, awful sound, and then sank back into the earth like it had never been there at all. Jake looked down at her, breathing hard, his hands still gripping her arms. She was alive, but barely. Her breathing was weak, and her skin was covered in glowing green slime. The acid had burned through part of her sleeve, and her legs were shaking. Still, she looked at him and whispered something in her own language. Jake couldn't understand the words, but he understood the look in her eyes. Shock, fear, and maybe, just maybe, gratitude. The jungle was silent now, but something had changed. Jake didn't know it yet. But saving her would pull him into something much bigger, something deeper than the jungle itself. A bond had begun in the shadows of a deadly world, and the jungle was not done testing it, not yet. The rain fell gently through the leaves as Jake carried the alien girl in his arms. Her body was limp, and the slime on her skin was starting to cool fast. He didn't know how long she had left if the plant's acid had gotten into her bloodstream. Things could turn worse quickly. His camp wasn't far. Hidden behind a thick wall of old roots, he had built it when his team disappeared. Using metal sheets, vines, and what little tech he had left. He laid her down on a soft patch of moss near the fire pit and quickly activated the small heat lamp. Steam rose as the slime began to dry. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Jake worked fast, slicing open one of his sealed med packs. Pouring neutralizing gel on her arms and legs, she flinched but didn't wake. "Don't die now," he muttered. Not sure if he was talking to her or himself. Her face looked peaceful, even in pain. Strange silver lines glowed faintly on her cheeks, probably a mark of her rank or bloodline. He had read something like that in the alien language files. Hours passed, the rain stopped, and night fell, the fire crackled softly. Jake sat nearby, sharpening his knife and keeping watch. Suddenly, she stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, gold and glowing. She tried to sit up fast, but winced and fell back. He moved closer, raising a hand. Hey, easy," he said. "You're safe now." She blinked at him, confused. Her lips moved, speaking something soft and musical in her own language. He shook his head. "I don't speak that. Sorry." After a few seconds, she frowned, her voice rough but determined. "You?" "Human," she said, pausing between the words. Jake smiled a little. "Yeah, that's me." "You nearly became plant food." She didn't smile. Her eyes searched his face like she was trying to understand why he was here, why he helped her. Why? "Save me," she asked in slow galactic common. Her voice was quiet but strong. Jake shrugged. "Because you were dying." She stared for a long time, then looked away. Her fingers brushed the edges of the slime-damaged sleeve, burned and half-torn. She seemed embarrassed. "My name is Valerie," she said after a moment. "Jake," he answered. "Jake Morgan." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the forest breathe around them. Valerie's eyes kept scanning the shadows. Her hand rested near her belt, but her weapon was missing, probably lost in the fall. Jake saw her worry and reached behind him, pulling it out of his bag. He placed it beside her gently. She looked at it, then looked at him, surprised. "You do not keep it?" she asked, confused. "Not my style," he replied. "Besides, I figured you'd wake up angry and shoot me." Valerie gave a tiny nod, almost a smile, but it faded quickly. "I need the Lyran bloom," she said suddenly, her hand pressing to her chest like the words hurt. "My brother. He will die soon." Jake leaned back, rubbing his forehead. He remembered the file. Lyran bloom glows blue, grows in dangerous ground, usually near old nests of jungle traps. "You went in alone for that?" he asked. She nodded once. "Stupid?" Jake muttered. "Brave, but stupid." Her gold eyes narrowed. "You call me stupid? After pulling me from a killer plant with no armor?" Jake chuckled. "Fair enough." He stared into the fire. Thinking hard, he could walk away now. Let her finish her mission. Let the aliens do what they do. But something about her voice, her eyes, the photo he saw on her wrist, screen it, didn't feel right to leave her. "All right," he said finally. "Let's go find your flower." Valerie blinked. "Together." Jake nodded. "If you want your brother to live, you'll need help getting through this jungle." She didn't answer right away, then slowly held out her hand. Jake hesitated, then took it for a second. Neither of them spoke. The firelight dancing on their faces, the jungle outside made no sound, but the wind shifted somewhere in the darkness. Something was listening, waiting. The real hunt hadn't even started yet. Morning came slowly, the light weak and cold through the thick green canopy. Valerie stood at the edge of the camp, staring into the trees. Her armor was cracked, her wounds sore. But her mind was sharper than ever. She had nearly died in this jungle and a human had saved her. Behind her, Jake packed supplies with quiet skill. He didn't ask questions, didn't try to impress her. He just moved like someone who had survived here far too long. He handed her a filtered water bottle and a wrapped protein bar. She looked at it with suspicion, sniffed, then took a bite. Her eyes widened slightly. "It wasn't disgusting. You people eat these?" she asked, chewing slowly. Jake smiled. "Yeah, well, the spicy ones ran out 2 weeks ago." They didn't talk much after that, but they moved together easily. Side by side, through the winding paths of the jungle, the scanner in Jake's hand gave a faint beep every 10 seconds, leading them deeper. The Lyran bloom was close now. Maybe 2 kilometers away, but danger had already started watching. From the canopy above, something with 8 legs and 4 eyes moved slowly. Its skin blended perfectly with the leaves. It made no sound as it followed the 2 travelers. Valerie's ears twitched. She paused, raising her weapon slightly. "Jake, noticed you hear something?" She nodded once, not sure what. But something follows. He looked up, slowly, then back down. He didn't want to spook her, but he had seen these things before, jungle phantoms. Fast, smart, and deadly. They liked to stalk prey for hours before striking. "Keep moving," he said quietly. "Don't show fear." They climbed down a ravine covered in wet moss, then moved through a foggy grove where glowing mushrooms lit the way. At the center of the grove, they finally saw Lyran bloom, a patch of blue. Softly shining flowers grew from a strange rock, their petals pulsing with energy. Valerie stepped forward, awe in her eyes. "It's real," she whispered. "My people said it was legend." She knelt to gather the petals carefully, placing them into a sealed glass container from her pouch. Atia, her hands shook slightly. This could save her brother's life. Jake stayed alert, his eyes scanning the treetops. His fingers gripped his plasma blade. Then he saw it. A blur of motion, something dropped silently from above, landing between them and the way out. It was tall, with long limbs and thick armor-like skin, eyes like hot metal, and a mouth that clicked open in 3 pieces. Jake raised his weapon, but it was too fast. The creature lunged, knocking him down, its claws cutting into his side. Valar screamed and fired her blaster. The shot hit the beast in the back, but it barely flinched. Jake rolled, slashed upward with his blade, burning a line across the creature's arm. It roared and turned toward him, ready to kill. But Valerie was already moving. She jumped onto its back, wrapped a vine around its neck, and pulled tight. It thrashed, trying to shake her off. Jake got to his feet, coughing blood, and charged forward. Together, they brought it down Jake's blade, stabbing through its lower chest. Valerie's vine crushing its windpipe until it stopped moving. For a moment, there was only silence. Jake fell to his knees, bleeding. Valerie rushed to him, pulling out a foam spray from her belt and pressing it into his side. "Stay awake," she said firmly, her voice shaking. "You don't get to die, not after this." He grinned weakly. "You're bossy? You know that?" She didn't laugh, just kept applying pressure, working quickly. Her hands steady now, no more fear. They didn't speak for a while, just breathing, listening to the jungle shift again. The danger had passed for now. Valerie looked at the flower, vial in her hand, then at Jake's face, pale and sweating. He had saved her life again, and now he was hurt because of it. She couldn't leave him here, not after everything. She leaned closer and whispered, "We make it out together." Jake closed his eyes and nodded slowly. Deal, but deep within the jungle, other creatures had heard the fight, and not all of them were afraid of fire and blades. The jungle heat returned with force, thick and wet. making the air feel heavy, like wet cloth wrapped around the lungs. Jake leaned against a tree, his wound sealed but still aching. Each step was harder than the last. Valar walked ahead now, her posture straight, blaster drawn. Every few minutes, she'd stop and look back, making sure Jake was still behind her. She had changed somehow. The fear in her eyes was gone, replaced by something harder, deeper. They were no longer two strangers. They were partners in survival. The path forward was rough, covered in fallen trunks and crawling roots. The scanner in her hand flickered with static. The signal was weak here. "Too much interference. We're almost near my shuttle," she said, voice low but steady. "Just one more ridge." Jake gave a thumbs up, too tired to speak, sweat rolling down his neck, his shirt soaked and torn. He had faced worse injuries. But the jungle had its own way of testing a man, not with speed, but with silence. Confusion and waiting death. The ridge came into view, sharp rocks jutting out like broken teeth. A narrow path winding through. Valar stopped, narrowing her. Golden eyes. Something didn't feel right. The wind had stopped, birds had stopped, even the leaves didn't move. She raised her blaster and motioned for Jake to stay low. They crept forward slowly, footsteps soft. But then her boot brushed something that clicked. A shimmer rippled through. The air in front of them, like a veil falling away, a net trap. Invisible to the eye until triggered, activated now, but somehow delayed before she could pull back. A powerful energy field shot up around them, blocking escape in every direction. Jake cursed under his breath. Great cloaked traps now. Then the ground under them shook, not from an animal, but from something rising. A section of the jungle. Floor peeled open like layers of skin, and from beneath it, a round chamber unfolded, smooth metal with old alien carvings glowing faint blue. "An ancient nest," Valari whispered, her voice suddenly different, almost reverent. "These were thought to be extinct." Jake looked confused. "You know what this is?" She nodded, eyes wide. "The creatures that ruled this moon centuries ago built nests underground to protect their offspring. Some say they were half plant, half machine. The platform they stood on suddenly dropped, fast and silent, sinking into the earth like an elevator with no brakes. Down they went, swallowed by the jungle once again. When it stopped, the light was dim and green. Soft vines hanging from metal ceilings, bioluminescent patterns pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. Jake pulled his blade. Valari took her stance, both ready for anything. The silence stretched on. Then, a soft sound echoed, a hum, like singing underwater from the darkness ahead. Something crawled into view, not a beast, not fully, but not intelligent either. It was long, smooth, and glowing at the joints. 6 legs moved without sound. Its head shaped like a flower, but its mouth filled with rows of teeth. It paused when it saw them, then raised its head and let out a sharp clicking noise. Valari whispered, "It's calling others." Jake didn't wait. He threw a flash grenade from his belt. The explosion lit the chamber in white, and the creature screeched, falling back. But more came, climbing from walls, sliding from above, surrounding them with grace and hunger. Jake and Valari stood back to back, their weapons firing in bursts, each shot cutting through shadow and bone. Acid sprang across the floor, but they were outnumbered. And the chamber was closing in. Valari spun, shot 2 more in the chest. Then yelled, "Over there! That tunnel! Move!" They ran, slipping through a narrow path as the creatures chased behind. One reached for Jake's ankle. Valari turned and blasted it point blank, her hand shaking but her aim true. They made it through just as the tunnel collapsed behind them, sealing the monsters in. Breathing hard, they leaned against the damp walls of the passage. Surrounded by flickering light and echoing growls in the distance, Jake gave a tired laugh. "You call this a shortcut?" Valari smiled faintly. "You're still alive, aren't you?" He looked at her, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, thanks to you." She looked away for a moment, like she didn't want to admit what she felt, then whispered, "Now we're even." But deep beneath them, the nest wasn't done shifting. Something older than both of them had awakened, and it remembered the scent of human blood. The tunnel narrowed as they moved forward, the light behind them fading fast. Jake limped slightly, his wound reopening from the sprint. Valerie noticed, but said nothing, her eyes fixed ahead. She was focused now, not just on surviving, but on getting them both out alive. The path opened into a strange chamber, round and warm. Walls pulsing with a faint blue light like breathing skin. Ancient symbols glowed across the surface. Forgotten language carved into stone and metal. Valerie slowed, then stopped, her hand touching one of the markings, her fingers tracing the curve of the glowing lines. "This is older than my people," she whispered, her voice soft with wonder. "I never believed these places were real." Jake leaned against a wall, breathing hard. "Well, they're real all right, and they really don't like visitors." She didn't smile, her gaze locked on the center of the room, where something stood tall and smooth, like a tree made of crystal and roots. It shimmered with strange colors, and at its base, "Jake," she said quickly, stepping forward. "That's it, the core bloom." He followed her eyes. And there it was, the Lyran bloom. Not just a flower, but a whole living system, glowing blue and gold, its petals moving gently like they were underwater. Valerie moved toward it, slowly, her breath catching. "If we take this one, my brother could be healed for sure. This is pure." But the bloom pulsed. Once, like a warning, Jake stepped beside her. "You sure it's safe?" She shook her head. "No." He sighed. "Didn't think so." She reached for the bloom. But before her fingers touched it, the chamber shook, a low rumble echoing through the floor. Jake stepped back, drawing his weapon. "Something's waking." Up, the bloom opened fully, and from its roots, a new form grew, tall, thin, glowing with the same light as the walls. A guardian, maybe, shaped like a figure, but not alive. Its face was smooth, no eyes, no mouth, just light and movement. Valerie raised her weapon, but it didn't attack. It just lifted one arm and pointed at her. Then it spoke not in words, but in her mind. Jake saw her freeze, eyes wide, her mouth slightly open. "Valerie?" he asked, stepping closer. She didn't answer for a moment, then whispered, "It knows me. It knows my blood, it says. Only one may take the bloom." Jake frowned. "What does that mean?" She looked at him, and her eyes were full of conflict. "It says one must stay behind, to keep balance." Jake shook his head. "No way. There's gotta be another way." The guardian's light dimmed, and a second figure formed beside it, this one darker, heavier, and it moved fast. The floor cracked open and a clawed foot stepped through. Not a guardian, this one was real, physical, and angry. Jake raised his blade. "Talk later, move now." The creature charged, roaring, its head smashing into the wall where Jake had just been. He rolled aside and slashed at its side. Valerie fired, but the blasts only slowed it. The two guardians, the glowing and the shadowed, now circled them like day and night. Opposites, locked in ancient design, Jake and Valerie backed into each other. Surrounded, outmatched, but not broken. "I'll distract the Dark One," Jake shouted. "You go for the bloom." She grabbed his wrist, eyes burning. "No, you're not dying here." He smiled, bloody and tired. "I already almost did. This time I choose." Before she could argue, he broke free, charged toward the shadowed guardian, yelling loud to draw its rage. Valerie turned to the bloom, heart racing, and shouted, "I offer myself." The glowing guardian paused, its light shifting, reading her, testing her. Then it stepped aside. She reached forward, pulled the core bloom free, and placed it in the container. The light faded as if accepting her choice. Behind her, the roar of the creature faded. She spun around. Jake was still standing, barely leaning against the wall. Bruised and bleeding, but alive, the shadowed guardian had vanished, melted into the floor, balance restored. Valerie rushed to him, holding him up, and whispered, "You idiot." He smiled weakly. "Did we win?" She looked at the container glowing in her pouch and nodded. "We did, but deep." Inside the roots below them, something still stirred, and this time it wasn't interested in balance. It was hungry. They didn't wait long. Valerie helped Jake to his feet, and together they climbed back up the tunnel path, the bloom safely stored. The walls of the nest still pulsing slowly like a giant sleeping heart. But the silence was wrong. Too deep, too complete. Jake limped forward, one hand gripping a vine-covered wall, his other pressing against his wounded side. "I swear this place is watching us," he muttered. Valerie didn't answer, her golden eyes scanning the dark tunnel ahead. The bloom at her hips still glowed softly, but the light had started to flicker. That worried her. The bloom was pure energy. It should have stayed bright. "We must leave fast," she said, "before something changes." They reached a narrow gap where light shone down from the jungle above. Soft, golden, like freedom was just a few steps away. Jake looked up and gave a tired laugh. "Never thought I'd be happy to see trees again." Valerie climbed first, pulling herself up with vines and roots. The jungle air returning with the scent of wet earth and strange flowers. Jake followed slowly, each step a struggle, sweat dripping into his eyes, blood staining his shirt. But just as he reached the surface, a sound stopped them both, a low rumble, deep and angry, coming from the nest below. Then the ground cracked just slightly, but enough to send a pulse through the earth. Valerie's eyes went wide. "No," she whispered. "It's waking up." Again, Jake looked back, confused. "Didn't we already beat the worst part?" She shook her head slowly. That was only the guardian. A roar tore through the jungle. Long and low, trees shook, birds scattered, and a huge section of the forest collapsed as something massive pushed upward. Roots ripped through the soil, and a dark green shape rose from the hole they had escaped. A living plant beast, taller than anything they had seen. Its head shaped like a flower, but its face was a ring of teeth and thorns. Eyes glowed deep within the petals, and vines uncurled. Like whips snapping at the air, Jake backed up, stunned. That thing was under us the whole time. Valerie grabbed his arm. "Run." They didn't look back. Crashing through vines and thick leaves, ducking under branches, jumping over fallen logs. The creature followed. Not fast, but steady, vines stretching far ahead to catch them. Pulling trees down in its path, Valerie's shuttle wasn't far now. She could feel the beacon through her implant, blinking softly like a heartbeat. "Left," she shouted, turning sharply and pulling Jake with her. But a vine caught his leg mid-step, yanking him off the ground and slamming him into a tree. He groaned, dazed, trying to get up as the vine wrapped tighter. Lifting him, Valerie didn't hesitate. She fired 3 shots into the vine, each blast cutting deep. The last one making it shriek and drop Jake to the ground. She ran to him, pulling him up, throwing his arm around her shoulder. "You're heavier than you look," she grunted. Jake laughed through pain. "I get that a lot." They reached the clearing where her shuttle stood, half covered in moss, but still functional. The ramp opened as she neared. Responding to her ID signal, she helped Jake inside, then turned and fired one last blast at the creature still pushing through the trees. It paused for a moment, vines twitching, then slowly began to sink back into the earth, not retreating, just waiting, watching the jungle closed around it again like it had never moved. Valerie sealed the ramp, heart racing, breath sharp. then ran to the front and started the engine sequence. Jake sat on the floor behind her, his back against a wall, smiling through the exhaustion. "So," he said, voice dry, "still think humans are weak?" Valerie glanced at him over her shoulder. "You're still breathing, aren't you?" He gave a tired grin. Barely, she looked at the container in her hand. The bloom's glow weak, but still there. It would survive the trip, just enough time to synthesize the cure. She didn't say it out loud, but he could see it on her face. Hope. Finally, real hope, as the shuttle lifted from the ground. The trees below swayed gently, hiding their secrets once more. But something still stirred beneath them, deeper than roots, older than nests, and it had learned their names. The stars stretched wide above the landing platform as Valerie's shuttle touched down. Engines sighing, lights glowing blue under the belly of the ship. Her people had gathered, silent and tense. All eyes locked on the door that hissed open. Slowly, she stepped out first, tired but standing tall. Her armor cracked and stained, her golden eyes shining with purpose. In her hands, she held the glowing container, the Lyron Bloom, still alive, still pulsing with soft light. Behind her came Jake, limping, face bruised, one arm in a rough sling, his clothes torn and blood-streaked. The alien soldiers at the edge of the crowd raised their weapons in alarm, confused by the human's presence. But Valerie raised her hand, firm and calm. "He is with me," she said, voice like steel. "He saved me, more than once." They hesitated, then lowered their guns. But whispers spread fast through the crowd. "Is that a human? He brought her back alive." No one has ever returned from the jungle. A small boy ran through the crowd pale. Shaking, eyes wide, he looked up at Valerie with tears already falling. "Valerie," he cried, "you came back." She dropped to her knees and pulled him into her arms, holding him close, voice breaking as she whispered, "I told you I would." She handed the bloom to the medtechs, who ran off without a word, heading to prepare the cure. Time was still running short, but hope now had a shape, a chance. Jake stood silently, watching, his body aching, but his chest strangely light. Valerie rose and walked to him slowly, the crowd parting like waves, her people unsure what to make of this injured, quiet human who had walked through death beside their own. She stopped in front of him, then gave a small nod. "Come," she said, "you've done more than enough. For one lifetime, you deserve rest." He followed her through the silver corridors of the outpost, the floor humming beneath their feet, alien lights pulsing with calm colors. She led him to a quiet room, clean and warm, with a soft bed and glowing walls. As he sat down, she moved to the doorway, but didn't leave. "You know," she said softly, "when I first saw you, I thought you would slow me down." Jake smiled faintly. "You weren't wrong." She tilted her head, a faint smile playing on her lips. "But I didn't expect you to save my life." "Twice wasn't part of the plan," he said, rubbing his neck. "But plans change." She stepped closer, slower this time, her eyes searching his face, not for wounds, but for something else. "I've seen warriors of my kind run from that jungle," she said, voice almost a whisper. "But you walked into it for someone you didn't even know." Jake looked up, meeting her gaze. "You weren't just someone," he said simply. Silence fell between them, soft and warm. Then a chime sounded on her wrist her brother had received. The cure and his vital signs were stabilizing. The bloom had worked. A tear slipped down Valerie's cheeks before she could stop them. She wiped them quickly. Embarrassed, Jake reached up, his hand resting gently on her arm. "I'm glad he's okay," he said. "He's lucky to have you." She looked down at his hand, then slowly placed her own over it. "You didn't have to stay," she said quietly. "But you did." He didn't answer. He just held her gaze, and for the first time since she met him, she felt truly safe. Later that night, Valerie returned to check on him again, but found him asleep, breathing softly. A faint smile on his lips, even in dreams, she sat beside him, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of his hand, and whispered, "You're not weak, human." Outside the window, the stars blinked silently, and far away, in the depths of the jungle, the great creature slept once more, but its memory remained. 2 souls had walked through its darkness and returned with light. And that story, whispered first in shadows, would be passed down for generations. The tale of the alien girl who faced the jungle and the human who refused to let her be swallowed.